Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. We're kind of in between, let's say, Tuesday, September 29th and Wednesday, September 30th. This is going to be our next Senate election prediction video, our 5-week Senate election prediction video. We are nearing crunch time, folks. It's just about time for this election to take place. We are making this video just fresh after the first presidential debate. And wow, that was a doozy, is all I'll say. I feel like I need my stomach pulled after that. But, setting that aside, that's obviously the presidential side of things. There's a lot to talk about in this Senate election prediction video. Like we did in the last presidential video, I'm going to move a little faster through some of the safer states than we normally do and really focus on some of these battleground states because there really is a lot to discuss. So let's jump right in with the state of Alaska. We mentioned in our last Senate election prediction video, and we've touched on this in the presidential ones as well, that the state of Alaska is very hard to get a very complete, firm grasp on. And that is because it's a very elastic state, no pun intended. What do I mean by elastic? Well, it's a state where moderates from both parties can be elected, and it's a state where independents are very often popular. Of course, remember, this is a state where Lisa Murkowski lost in the Republican primary and then ultimately decided to run as an independent after losing in the primary. That very same election, she ran as an independent again and won. Okay, that's incredible. Al Gross, meanwhile, who really is the Democratic candidate, even though he is officially running as an independent, has seen an uptick in polling recently, and in the latest poll had him tied with Dan Sullivan, the incumbent. We've talked about how Dan Sullivan is a very unknown figure, okay? Not that popular, not that unpopular. Okay, he's kind of what the state of Alaska is in general. Okay, let's just put it that way. I apologize to any Alaskans up there watching this. I love you, but it's not a state that we, at least at first, immediately think of. And Dan Sullivan is kind of that mold. He's just, kind of a generic guy who doesn't have very high approval ratings, but is not that disapproved of either. He's kind of right in the middle of the pack. So with that in mind, I think he has a pretty good chance of winning re-election, even though we've seen a little bit of a surge from Al Gross. The National Party has not, been too invested in this state. I think there's a little complacency on the part of the Republican Party, but so far the Democrats have not taken advantage of that too much, but in large part because they're focused on other races. Oregon, Jeff Merkley is going to be just fine. Idaho, Jim Risch is going to be just fine as well. Now we get into some real ones. Montana, big one here. There's so much to break down in this state. It's very difficult to sum up just how much is really happening in this state. Okay, we have four different races occurring in the state all at once. We've got the presidential race, which Donald Trump will win. We know that. You have a governorship race, which is very close. You have a House race, which is even closer, and a Senate race, which may even be closer than that. Okay, so let's talk about the governorship race first. Mike Cooney is currently the lieutenant governor of Montana, and he is running against Greg Gianforte, who currently is the statewide office holder in this lone congressional district, that is, in Montana. Throughout the campaign season, Greg Gianforte has been leading Mike Cooney. Now, keep in mind, Mike Cooney is part of an administration led by Governor Steve Bullock, who, of course, is the Democratic Senate candidate. That administration is very, very popular. Remember, Bullock and Mike Cooney, of course, the lieutenant governor, won re-election in 2016 in a ruby red state that elected Donald Trump by over 20 points. Okay, so clearly voters, even though a lot of voters don't often know who their lieutenant governor is and they're not that focused on that when they're specifically there at the polls that one day, the reality is it does stand for something, that voters clearly like what Mike Cooney and Steve Bullock stand for. So, and even if people don't know that much about Mike Cooney and who in the world he is, he can obviously disseminate that information during his campaign. And by and large, he has been doing that. And in recent weeks, we've seen an uptick in polling for him. The most recent poll had Greg Gianforte leading by just about a point. Now, in the House race, Kathleen Williams, who ran for office 2 years ago, is running against Matt Rosendale, the Republican who has seemingly run for office almost 10 times now. Well, it's hard to keep track of how many times he's given it a shot. Kathleen Williams so far is winning that race, and that's a good sign for the Democrats. Now, why is it a good sign? Because let's keep in mind that Greg Gianforte, who is, as we just mentioned, running for governor, he is the one representing this House race as of right now. So if Kathleen Williams is running for this seat and is winning against Matt Rosendale, it suggests that those same voters that are evaluating who they want to be their next lone representative are unhappy with Greg Gianforte, and therefore are going to elect Kathleen Williams, which obviously bodes well for Mike Cooney, because between Mike Cooney and Kathleen Williams, Greg Gianforte is obviously the one commonality. Now, on the Senate level, that does ring a lot of bells, because Steve Daines is the current incumbent Republican senator, and he's obviously being challenged by Steve Bullock. One of the most revered and beloved Democrats nationally and in any state is Steve Bullock, the governor of Montana. Remember, it's easy to lose sight of the fact that there has not been a Republican governor in the state of Montana since the year 2000, okay? And, for decades, or for 40 years, there have been Democrats in this state. Max Baucus for years, John Tester, we know the whole thing. Barack Obama got 46% of the vote here in 2008. We get it. Point being, though, Steve Bullock has that commonality with Mike Cooney, who obviously has a certain thing to be happy about given what we're seeing in the Kathleen Williams House race. Okay, now, a ton of money has been poured into this race from both parties. Steve Bullock was the one who took charge first, kind of drew first blood, and about 100 days ago, Steve Bullock was the one to charge into the lead at first. There was one poll that had him up by about 4 points. Another that had him up by about 7 points. Since then, Steve Daines has kind of retaken the upper hand a little bit. The most recent poll had them tied. That's, again, a good sign for the Democrats, because in this last stretch of these last 50 days, which of course we're now 15 days into and about 16, any trends that you're seeing, that's generally where it's going to end up, okay? If you look at all the polling history across the United States, with only a few, exceptions, and there are some, and we even saw some of them as recently as 2018, the candidates that see that upswing in the last 6 to 8 weeks in what are competitive races, because you can have an upswing, but, shorten the gap from 15 points to 10 points. But if you're down 3-4 points, say, and you're within the margin of error, and then you end up taking the lead or you tie, that upswing generally leads to that candidate winning. So all of that is to say, I know that's a whole lot to throw at you in the state. That's why I'm characterizing this as a tilt blue. Now, in Wyoming, that's going to be a safe Republican state. Now, obviously, in this portion of the country, all on the western part of the country, the Mountain West states and the West Coast, the Democrats have 3 pickup opportunities. Okay, obviously, oh, wow, I didn't even realize I labeled this as safe Democratic. My mistake. There you go. So in Colorado, John Hickenlooper, of course, was the best candidate that the Democrats could have fielded for this race. He's the former governor, as we know. He ran for president. Very, very popular governor. Everyone on both sides liked him. He got along with the state legislature by and large there. He was revered, basically, in that state. He's kind of similar to Steve Bullock in a lot of ways, and a big part of that is because he's a very moderate Democrat, kind of known as a conservative Democrat. Now, in my personal opinion, some of his policies have shifted a little bit further and further to the left, over this election cycle, which is fine. I'm not saying that's wrong. Now, maybe that's because he's just trying to, challenge Cory Gardner sufficiently. Cory Gardner, of course, has voted with Donald Trump over 90% of the time. We know that whole deal. He's very unpopular by and large. And, of course, we have seen a lot of his videos going around that have him supporting the blockage of Merrick Garland 4 years ago. And in a state where you really don't have that much of a margin for error as a Republican, remember, Cory Gardner, as we've outlined before, is kind of the last vestige of GOP politics in this state. That, by and large, is going to be his undoing. So I think John Hickenlooper is in a good position with all that, in mind, combined with out fundraising Cory Gardner, and of course the biggest thing, he is way ahead in the polls. John Hickenlooper is going to be just fine. I'm going to label that likely. Now in Arizona, this race has kind of shifted a little bit over the last 80 days or so. Mark Kelly, though, throughout the campaign season has been leading Martha McSally. Martha McSally, a deeply disliked GOP senator. Listen, the Republicans, they kind of asked for this, in all honesty. Okay, Doug Ducey, the Republican governor of Arizona, an ardent Trump supporter, by the way, he was the one who kind of set this one up, I'm afraid, for the GOP. Remember, Martha McSally was on that ballot in 2018, and she lost to Kyrsten Sinema, an openly bisexual woman, by the way. Now, while Kyrsten Sinema, policy-wise, is very, very, very moderate, the fact that she's an openly bisexual woman is not something you would necessarily associate with Arizona politics. You would more so think, okay, well, that's someone that could be elected in Vermont or in Hawaii or somewhere like that. Not Arizona. Not a state that only a short time ago was represented by John McCain and Jeff Flake, and elected Donald Trump and John McCain before that, and Mitt Romney, and so on and so on. And hasn't voted for a Democrat since the 90s. We get the whole story with Arizona. But since then, look, Martha McSally was defeated by Kyrsten Sinema. There are now more House members in the United States House, not the State House, that are Democrats than Republicans, as we know. And Doug Ducey reappointed Martha McSally to that open Senate seat after her defeat in 2018, which, if you ask me, politically is suicide. And now the Democrats fielded a pretty good candidate, Mark Kelly, the husband of Gabrielle Giffords, the former astronaut, the whole story. And Mark Kelly's trouncing Martha McSally, regularly ahead by 12 points, 13 points. A recent Fox News poll had him up by 17 points. Fox News, by the way, an A-plus pollster. It may be an A now on 538. Mark Kelly's going to be just fine in this state. I do not expect, it probably will ultimately be closer than, it'll be within 10 points, but Mark Kelly is going to win this Senate race, I can say, with a rather extreme degree of certainty. Just like I can say Ben Ray Lujan, the Democrat, will hang on to this open seat in New Mexico. The mobile game 270, along with 538, still label this as a swing state along with Colorado. But I don't really think either of these are too much of a question. Remember, the Trump campaign is still spending a rather large sum of money in New Mexico. I'm not exactly sure how good an idea that is, given the fact that this is, almost in a virtual certainty going to go blue. Of course, this was one of 7 states that flipped a governorship from red to blue in 2018, the others being Nevada, Kansas, Illinois, Maine, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Of course, the Republicans flipped Alaska from blue to red. But that's all to say that in New Mexico, the Republican governor, whose name is escaping me at the moment, was a very moderate Democrat and has since been replaced by Michelle Lujan Grisham, who was, of course, on Joe Biden's shortlist for vice president for a long time. In South Dakota, we've talked before about how the Democratic Party here is very, very well respected, but it's not going to be enough to defeat Mike Rounds. Ben Sasse is going to be fine in Nebraska. Now, keep an eye on this one. Okay, this one is kind of a sleeper race here in Kansas. Barbara Bollier and Roger Marshall. It's a close race, y'all. It really is. This is not one that you can really just say is in the Roger Marshall column just yet. I think Roger Marshall is ultimately going to pull this one out because these states do have an identity. However, that same identity was put into question a little bit in 2018 when Laura Kelly, the Democrat, the female, defeated Chris Kobach in that gubernatorial race and did so by about 5 or 6 points. Okay, Chris Kobach threw his hat in the ring again for this Senate race, lost in the primary to Roger Marshall, but let's look at the most recent polling. Data for Progress had Barbara Bollier and Roger Marshall tied. That was a poll released on September 24th. The one before that had Marshall by 2 points, Marshall by 1 point, and then another poll that was conducted back in March did have Roger Marshall up by 10 points. But some civics polls before that, I've said this to you before, don't take too much stock in civics polling, did have Barbara Bollier up by 1 point. So just out of respect to her, I'll mention that. But again, these states do have an identity. I'm going to label this lean Republican. Oklahoma, Jim Inhofe is going to be just fine. Now in Texas, this is a very competitive state on the presidential level. Donald Trump leads Joe Biden, but well within the margin of error by about 1 to 2 points. This is a state that is obviously far, far more competitive than the state of California is. The GOP has to spend a ton of money to keep this state in their column. Ted Cruz nearly lost, in 2018, and Donald Trump is in trouble in this state. I do think he's going to pull it out, but it will be close. However, John Cornyn is going to edge out MJ Hager. The best polls we've seen for MJ Hager have her only within about 5 points. John Cornyn's going to be just fine. I'm going to label it lean, just because I think that'll be the final margin. I do expect MJ Hager to get about 46% of the vote, but that's about where I think they will cap out. Now, in Minnesota, Tina Smith, I don't think the Democrats really have too much to worry about here. This is a state that has gotten away from the Republicans. Donald Trump only lost the state by 1.5 points in 2016, and Hillary Clinton, mind you, not only did she win it by less than 2 points, but it was with a plurality of the vote, by the way. So she did not perform very well in this state. So naturally, the Trump campaign thought, okay, well, surely we're going to prioritize these 10 electoral votes. And if we do that, it's going to be so difficult for the Democrats, to, flip this map altogether and reach 270. However, that has since been dashed. The Democrats are in business here. There were 3 statewide races in the 2018 midterms here, 2 Senate races and the governorship. The Democrats swept them, won all 3, and by convincing margins. Now, having said that, Tina Smith is the one who was up the sort of like the junior senator, let's say, to Amy Klobuchar. She is definitely the most vulnerable between Amy Klobuchar, the governor, Tim Walz, and herself. But even with that in mind, given everything that we've seen happening in Minneapolis, that's only going to boost turnout for the Democratic Party. I'm going to label this safe for Tina Smith. Okay, now in Iowa. This is such a fascinating state. On the presidential level in 2008 and 2012, Barack Obama took it home both times. Donald Trump won it with a big margin in 2016. Since then, it's been a little better for the Democrats because, as we know, the Republicans have both senators here, Charles Grassley and Joni Ernst, 2 rather high-profile senators, by the way, especially in the case of Grassley. But since 2016, the Democrats have seen better results here. The governorship race did narrow up quite a bit. Kim Reynolds, though, still won, the Republican, over Fred Hubbell. Fred Hubbell, the Democrat, got about 47% of the vote, which is definitely closer than what Hillary Clinton got, and by, I think, 4 points. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head. Also, there are 4 House districts in the state of Iowa. The Democrats have 3 of them. Okay, so that's encouraging for them. And the 4th one, of course, is up here in the northwest portion of the state that for years was controlled by Steve King, who, of course, was primaried out and wasn't even very close, lost by thousands and thousands of votes. Meanwhile, Teresa Greenfield, the Democrat, is ahead of Joni Ernst. She's ahead of Joni Ernst. Okay, it's still within the margin of error, but she has definitely established a lead at this point. Okay, you see polls that have a candidate up by 1 point, 2 points held. There are even polls, 80 or 100 days ago that even had Amy McGrath ahead of Mitch McConnell by about a point or 2. But if you show that lead consistently, that's one thing. And that's what Teresa Greenfield has done. Not only has she outraised Joni Ernst, but she has cemented and established a lead over Joni Ernst by about 3 percentage points. That is why I am labeling this a tilt Democrat, which is a huge pickup for the Democrats. And so you can see the state of this map here. That's already 4 flips for the Democrats before we even reach all this. Okay, so this is, in this map alone, this is going very well, as we know, for the Democrats. Arkansas, there is no Democratic candidate, and Louisiana, the Democratic candidate only very, very recently entered the race. The only thing to even mention about this race is that Bill Cassidy is still recovering from COVID-19. We wish him the best. Now, let's go up here to Illinois. Dick Durbin, very popular Democratic senator, longtime establishment figure, part of the leadership now, of course, as well. Illinois has shifted to the left very, very convincingly. Massive protests in Chicago have kind of cemented it as well. Dick Durbin's going to be just fine. We'll come down here to Kentucky. There was a brief moment in time, kind of early in the election season, where it looked like Amy McGrath was going to have a little bit of a Beto O'Rourke thing going on against Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell is so unpopular, as we know. He is, of course, no longer the most unpopular senator in the country. That was taken over by Susan Collins and then later Tom Cotton down here in Arkansas. And, of course, Amy McGrath is a fundraising superstar who had at one point over $45 million in cash on hand, the whole deal. She's easily outraised Mitch McConnell the whole time, although you should know that part of that reason is that McConnell has spent so much of that time raising money for other races, as he does very, very well each election cycle, and not as much about himself. I don't think McConnell's really that worried about whether he wins this race by 5 points or by 20 points. I do think McGrath will get over 40%. Okay, I do think it'll get around 42, 43%. For what it's worth, I know it was very unusual circumstances, but the Democrats did win that governorship race. Okay, Andy Beshear did, it is worth mentioning. And it is a state that has become a little friendlier to the Democrats over the years. Remember, they were the ones who, again, another name that's escaping me, I apologize. As you know, I try to do this all extemporaneously without any information so I can just talk to you guys. The Democrats enlisted one of their representatives from the state of Kentucky to deliver the Democratic response after I think it was the first State of the Union under Donald Trump's term. So that is at least a little bit notable. Maybe that has helped them. Who knows? We can't really quantify that. But Mitch McConnell's going to be fine. Tennessee, also a safe state for the Republicans, even in a vacating seat. Now in Mississippi, Mike Espy is giving it another shot against Cindy Hyde-Smith. Cindy Hyde-Smith, of course, was a very controversial figure in her last election cycle. I think some of that has sort of been swept under the rug a little bit by now. People have kind of forgotten about it. I will say, though, it will help Mike Espy is the fact that, look, let's not forget he did get 46% last time, so that's notable. And second of all, turnout's going to be high. Okay, turnout's going to be high in this election. Minorities are going to be voting in ways we probably have not seen before. Registration is extremely high, all that. And of course, look, Mississippi is the highest minority population state in the country. So that's why I'm going to label this lean Republican, although, again, that's sort of a margin characterization as opposed to a likelihood characterization. Alabama, look, Doug Jones, he's an admirable figure. He's a guy who, independent of his politics, is a guy who, prosecuted the 16th Street church bombing. We know the whole story about Doug Jones. And he was, of course, at the center of a very, very polarizing Senate race with Roy Moore. He's not running against Roy Moore this time. Okay, he's now, while Tommy Tuberville may not be the most robust candidate himself, he's going to defeat Doug Jones. Okay, let's just put it that way. Okay, this one is fascinating here. Buckle up, because we're going to be talking about the state of Georgia for a long time here. This special election here has suddenly become a real race. Okay, just today, Raphael Warnock, who I'm not sure we've ever mentioned him on this channel, is suddenly surging in this state, just surging into the lead in this jungle primary. Now, again, this is a civics poll, okay, so just bear with me on that. But Raphael Warnock leads Doug Collins by 5 points in one civics poll. Doug Collins, okay, who's an extremely well-known figure, not just in Georgia politics, but all the way around throughout the United States House of Representatives. In fact, he kind of spearheaded the anti-impeachment effort in the House, even though his party was in the minority. Another one has Raphael Warnock ahead by 10 points against Kelly Loeffler. Now, another one, a civics poll, even has Matt Lieberman, the son of Joe Lieberman, who notably endorsed Susan Collins about a week ago or so. He is even tied with Kelly Loeffler. So Kelly Loeffler is in a bad position. That same civics poll has Raphael Warnock up by 13 points across that jungle primary system, with him reaching 38%. Now, a Quinnipiac University poll, which is a far more respected pollster, has Warnock up by 8 points. Now, what you should know, though, is that Kelly Loeffler and Doug Collins add up to 45% in that jungle primary between them. Loeffler gets 23, Collins gets 22% in this Quinnipiac University poll. Warnock, on the other hand, gets 31%. So he's in the lead, but you have to imagine that the Loeffler voters that eventually end up with Doug Collins, or who knows, maybe Kelly Loeffler is the one who comes in second, those voters that voted for the other candidate will latch on with her. Of course, there are two other Democrats who in this poll comprised another 13%, between Matt Lieberman and his last name is Tarver. I don't know anything about him. So if you add up those 13%, that gets Warnock to about 44%, and Loeffler and Collins reach 45%. So that combined with the civics polls that had Warnock way ahead of the rest of the field, and even ahead of Doug Collins in a one-on-one matchup, which it suddenly looks like this may damn well be. I mean, look out. I mean, suddenly Raphael Warnock is in position to maybe take this race. So I'm still going to label it tilt GOP, because out of the 4 leading candidates, the Republicans have the 2 strongest. But the Democrats have someone who I think is suddenly going to make it to the top 2 and advance to the runoff in January. Now, for the regular election, Jon Ossoff has been caught in quite a dead heat now throughout this campaign season with David Perdue. Okay, David Perdue's in a tight one, man. Okay, and the most recent polls that were released today had Ossoff by about a point or 2. Now, Jon Ossoff's campaign said something very interesting this week, and that was they pointed out that Stacey Abrams, who of course lost with about 48% of the votes, she lost by about 50,000 votes in an election that was marred by controversy, as we know. What his campaign said, and again, this is coming from his campaign. This has not yet been well, it has been, I will say, by the AP, but it should be noted, as we always say, we are always quick to disclaim that it comes from someone's campaign, so it might always, have somewhat of a tilt to it. But this has been independently verified that his campaign alone has been the source of 750,000 more registrations than what we saw in the 2018 gubernatorial race. Again, as we've outlined on this channel, and I'm going to beat you guys over the head with this until you're unconscious with it, turnout helps the Democratic Party. Okay, so I'm still not quite able to characterize this for Jon Ossoff, but we're getting close. Okay, if we start seeing a couple polls that have, even just a couple, that have Ossoff by 3-4 points, this race is going to get into his column. South Carolina, very similar to Georgia. Lindsey Graham's in trouble. Lindsey Graham is in some real trouble. Jamie Harrison is, to say it's a wipeout financially would be too kind to Lindsey Graham. Jamie Harrison, this is in my lifetime watching and covering elections. I'm not sure I've ever seen a more lopsided financial war than this. Jamie Harrison is just completely demolishing Lindsey Graham financially. And that is starting to be reflected in these polls. Lindsey Graham throughout the election season continuously had about a 6-7% lead over Lindsey Graham, kind of similar to John Cornyn in Texas. Like a candidate, yeah, we get it, a lot of enthusiasm, but let's face it, it's South Carolina. That's not really the case anymore. Okay, this is still, I would say Lindsey Graham is still the favorite, but it's a real race. Okay, a YouGov poll that got added on the 27th had Graham up by 1 point, and a Brilliant Corners Research and Strategies poll, albeit a pollster that is not too established, had Harrison up by 2 points. A Morning Consult poll added on the 22nd, Graham +1. A Quinnipiac poll on the 16th, they were tied. Public Policy Polling had Graham up by 3. And then Quinnipiac back in August, they were tied. Okay? So this race has changed. It has. Okay, we normally labeled this like likely just because we wanted to wait and see, just this advertising blitz that Jamie Harrison is on and is going to continue to have because of his gigantic war chest that he has at his disposal, how much of an effect that would have on this race. It's having an effect. It is having an effect. And there's still 5 more weeks that's going to happen. And, look, Lindsey Graham knows it because he basically went on Fox News and begged for money. So I'm now going to label this tilt for the first time on this channel. North Carolina, Cal Cunningham is leading Thom Tillis. Okay, these two had their debate about 2 weeks ago. Wasn't a whole lot to really discuss about that debate. Kind of just a middle-of-the-road sort of textbook debate between the two candidates. Of course, they're very similar in nature. They're both kind of, middle-aged white men. But, which is, of course, nothing to, that doesn't really, make too much of a difference when we're breaking down this video. However, what is notable and kind of strange about the state of North Carolina is that the Democrats that get elected here are all sort of a similar cloth, right? John Edwards, Roy Cooper, the governor, and now Cal Cunningham, who of course hasn't been elected yet, they're all sort of middle-aged white men. Who knows? I mean, maybe that seems to work. They're all sort of moderate figures. Cal Cunningham is not someone he is, to this point, hasn't really talked about the Green New Deal, anything like that. He's sort of a little bit of a centrist Democrat, kind of like Joe Biden, by and large. Meanwhile, Roy Cooper, a very popular Democratic governor, is winning thoroughly against his challenger, Dan Forest. He is going to be just fine in that race. There are also 2 House races down here right on the border with South Carolina that are going to be competitive. And I think the Democrats are going to get at least one of them, probably both. That's going to boost Cal Cunningham. Now, I will say on the presidential level, Donald Trump is doing better than Thom Tillis is. What does that mean? That means that you have voters, it's kind of similar to Montana, that are going to vote independent of the presidential race, not because of the presidential race. There are definitely some voters out there who are a little just maybe, impatient with Thom Tillis, tired of Thom Tillis, who are going to vote for Cal Cunningham and Roy Cooper because they just genuinely like him, but also vote for Donald Trump because maybe they have an issue with Joe Biden, who knows. But because this is a Senate election prediction video, I'm going to keep this same characterization we had last time. That's a lean. That's another pickup for the Democrats. They're 5th in this map to this point. Daniel Gate is no match for Mark Warner. Virginia has become a safe Democratic retention state for them. They're going to be just fine. West Virginia's Shelley Moore Capito is not in any danger whatsoever. Now, in Michigan, John James, kind of similar to Mike Espy, is giving it another shot. Okay, he ran against Debbie Stabenow 2 years ago, came up short. Again, it's Michigan, so he's always, a Republican's going to do admirably well here. He got about, I think the final number was 45.7, I want to say. Don't quote me on that, please. Please correct me, again, if anything I say is wrong. Again, this is all extemporaneous, and I'm going very fast, obviously. But John James is giving it another shot, this time against Gary Peters. The one thing John James has going for him is that Gary Peters is far, far less well-known nationally than Debbie Stabenow is. Stabenow is on television much more. Of course, she's a woman. Democratic female senators typically get a little bit more of the limelight, and of course, she is the senior senator. So, she has been a little bit more in the limelight compared to Gary Peters, but polling is what it is, and Gary Peters has been thoroughly in charge. Further diminishing John James's chances is he is someone who was slated to speak at the RNC, but once it went virtual, that was kind of upended. So I'm going to label this likely. That's more of a likelihood characterization than a margin characterization. I do think John James will get about 45, 46% again. That actually may even be I think that's a lead characterization by most evaluators. But anyway, you get the idea. Delaware, nothing to talk about. Chris Coons is going to be fine. New Jersey, Cory Booker is going to be just fine. In Rhode Island, Jack Reed is also going to be fine. And in Massachusetts, we at least finally know now that Ed Markey will remain the Democratic senator from this state. The general election means nothing here. It was just a matter of whether or not it would be him or Joe Kennedy who challenged him very aggressively in the primary, but keep him short. New Hampshire, the Republicans missed the boat on this one because this is a state that they can have success in. Just like Vermont, the governorships are limited to 2-year terms here. That's why Chris Sununu, every time we do this, every time we come back to an election year, Chris Sununu is up for re-election and he just keeps on winning, okay? If he had run for Senate against Jeanne Shaheen, who knows? In order for the GOP to win in this state, they need a prominent figure within that state. And Kelly Ayotte, with all respect to her, is not really that person. Jeanne Shaheen is going to be just fine as a result. Keep an eye, though, on this state in 2 years, because Maggie Hassan won her election in this state by 0.1% in 2016. And should she be challenged by Chris Sununu, the Republicans may damn well pick up that Senate seat. All right, finally, before we get to Maine, we have to characterize the VP. I still, at this point, cannot characterize this for the Republicans. Why is it not clicking? I do not know. Please imagine that is blue, just like these. Now, in the state of Maine, let's see, is this working? Yeah, okay, strange. In the state of Maine, Susan Collins, she's resilient, as we know, and she picked up a little bit of a boost when Joe Lieberman, who's always been kind of a maverick, endorsed her, which obviously kind of pissed off a lot of Democrats because they need this state if they want the majority. Of course, in this map, they already have the outright majority regardless of the presidency. But here you go. Susan Collins is definitely in trouble and is definitely losing to Sarah Gideon, the female Speaker of the House in the state of Maine. Look, this has been gaining steam over the past 4 years. Susan Collins at one point was the most popular senator in the country. That seems like ages ago. Ever since her vote to confirm Judge Brett Kavanaugh, it's been pretty dire for Susan Collins. Okay, she at one point was the least popular senator, as we said, and a massive fundraising campaign has been levied against her. Sarah Gideon, the Democrats fielded a good candidate as well, the female Secretary of State, the Speaker of the House in the state of Maine. She's winning. Again, though, do not underestimate Susan Collins' ability to win elections. Okay, that's an important way to phrase that as well. Her ability to just win elections is very, 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 very important because she is someone who's resilient. She's very, very good at selling herself as that kind of bipartisan maverick senator, which to her credit, she's always been. Okay, she by and large has been. The Trump presidency, it's been a little different, and I think that's why you're seeing her down to Sarah Gideon, but that is something that you cannot go unannounced. With that said, I do think that Sarah Gideon is going to pull this out. It's going to be closer than people expect, though. I expect Susan Collins to get around 48% of the vote. So there you have it. That's, 6 pickups for the Democrats. They have an outside shot, I think, in Kansas, and a real chance to pick up one of these two in Georgia. And we don't know exactly where this is going to end up either in South Carolina. That's a flip for the Democrats in Arizona, Colorado, Montana, Iowa, North Carolina, Maine. The candidates being Mark Kelly, John Hickenlooper, Steve Bullock, Teresa Greenfield, Cal Cunningham, and Sarah Gideon. Now, we're going to do this for the first time on this channel. We're just going to go through the winners of each of these races just so you get a sense of, so that on Election Day you're familiar with the names as they rattle off on your screen, etc. We have Dan Sullivan winning re-election in Alaska. Jeff Merkley winning re-election in Oregon, Jim Risch in Idaho, Steve Bullock in Montana. I don't know. I believe it's Mike Enzi who's up for re-election in Wyoming, John Hickenlooper in Colorado, Mark Kelly in Arizona, Ben Ray Lujan in New Mexico, John Cornyn in Texas, Jim Inhofe in Oklahoma, Roger Marshall in Kansas, Ben Sasse in Nebraska, Mike Rounds in South Dakota. Then Tina Smith in Minnesota, Teresa Greenfield in Iowa, Tom Cotton in Arkansas, Bill Cassidy in Louisiana, Cindy Hyde-Smith, I beg your pardon, in Mississippi, Tommy Tuberville in Alabama, Doug Collins in the special election in Georgia, David Perdue in the regular election. This is going to be decided. This is that open race whose name is escaping me just at the moment. I was hoping I could get through all of these. Wasn't able to do it this time. Maybe next time. Cal Cunningham in North Carolina, Mitch McConnell in Kentucky, Shelley Moore Capito in West Virginia, Mark Warner in Virginia, Gary Peters in Michigan, Chris Coons in Delaware, Cory Booker in New Jersey, Jack Reed in Rhode Island, Ed Markey in Massachusetts, and finally Sarah Gideon in Maine. There are your winners, and that's your final Senate map, 52-48, favoring the Democrats. I don't know why I can't characterize the vice presidency here, but that's also going to go in the Democratic Party's favor. So, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I know that was a ton of information I just threw at you. Please, as always, comment down the suggestions below if you have anything you need to correct me on. Again, this is all kind of off the top. I'm not looking at any information. I just want to be able to talk to you, the voters, directly. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you have not already. Again, comment down the suggestions below. Pretty soon we'll be coming out with our next presidential election prediction video. Again, this election is now in 34 days. We're past the first debate. The next one's on October 15th in Miami. And we'll see you then. So thank you guys so much again for watching, and I'll see you in November.